Welcome back to A Kitsune's Tale. Please like, comment, and subscribe for future content. Now back to the story.
Chapter 13. Coming of Age. Feishan was roused from his reading by the sound of Kara's screams. Kara lay on the bed with her back arched and her face wrenched in pain. He reached out to touch her, only to be thrown back by some unknown power. All he could do was watch helplessly as she began to change. The changes were subtle at first, like the shift in her eyes. They began to frost over, slowly changing from their brown to a more white, icy color. Feishan was fascinated to see emerald green highlights begin to surface, accenting the dominant ice color. He watched as her muzzle began to extend, her jaw and face becoming slimmer, more defined. The most obvious change was the shift in her color. Her dark auburn fur began to change, gaining a dark red twinge highlighted by white and black tips. Her ears had also grown in length, with the inside fur standing out against the red and black-tipped ears. The most unique change was the lightning blue frosted pattern that started in the corner of her left eye and traveled down the side of her face and neck to beneath her shirt. It emerged again to continue over her shoulder and down her arm. The farther it traveled, the more distinct the intertwining bolts became. The pattern stopped between her thumb and first finger. The markings stood out sharply against Kara's dark red fur that now covered most of her body. The only exception was the white fur that began with her muzzle and ran down the entire length of her chest and abdomen. Kara's tails were the same as the rest of her body, with the underside of her tails turning white with the tips becoming completely black. Her overall shape had shifted noticeably. Besides the longer ears and muzzle, Kara's body appeared to have slimmed more, her muscle features becoming more defined. Feishan stepped back to study her better and noticed that she had also grown an easy 4 inches taller. The fingers on her hand had also grown longer and slimmer. Her body went limp, marking the end of her radical changes. Kara now lay still, breathing slowly. Feishan began to relax now that his own adrenaline began to subside. He attempted to rouse her from her sleep, but she refused to wake up. She sleeps for now. Feishan turned, ready to face whatever creature had invaded the quiet of the deserted estate. You have done well in guiding her, Feishan. He stared in shock at the goddess standing in front of him. Jia! Feishan dropped to his knee and bowed. What is your will? Rise, Feishan. Jia waited until he stood before her with his head bowed. Protect her. She is our best hope for leading my people back to the world of man. The life of this world is no longer measured in generations or decades, but in years. Serve me well, Feishan, and you shall gain your freedom. Feishan. I turned back to see Kara starting to sit up. He knew Jia was gone, so he went to help Kara. Feishan was no sooner at her side when she wrapped her arms around his neck, crying. I can't stay here any longer, she sobbed. I want to go home. Once Kara had calmed down enough to stand, he led her back through the estate to the great hall. Kara hesitated at the stairs, staring at the sealed door where she knew the Nine-Tail was entombed along with her servants and most elite guards. The memory of how Fursha had been sacrificed to serve her mistress in the afterlife brought a fresh tear to her eyes. The entire passage through the estate called up glimpses from her dreams. The 2 snarling kitsune statues stood at their posts, waiting to defend their long-dead master. The memory of how they had killed Kashela's assassin sent shivers down her spine. That was one image Kara wished she could forget. They met Sero and Pasha back at the village. Both came running when Kara and Feishan emerged from the forest. Kara's grandfather hesitated as he approached her cautiously. Kara, what happened to you? I could hear an undercurrent of thoughts seeping into my mind. Love for a child, concern over my changes, fear of what may have happened, and anger directed at Feishan for not protecting me. For the first time since I woke, I noticed the changes. I could see them through my grandfather's eyes. For the moment, I pushed back my own concerns and embraced Sero. I met Jia. I whispered loud enough for both Sero and Pasha to hear. I must return home soon, but I wanted to say goodbye to everyone. Ciro just nodded and led me back to my grandmother's home. I lay back on one of the many cushions available in the commons room, attempting to drink a glass of water made difficult by my elongated muzzle. By the time the löwenfrau, Roshi, and Pasha had arrived, I had resorted to lapping at the water. I sat the glass down once my companions were seated, and I had their attention. I told them about the meeting with Gia, leaving out my experiences in the dream and the existence of the lost palace. I think it is time for me to return to my own world and face my own demons. I am not sure what Gia wants of me exactly, but I believe it has something to do with returning everyone to their ancestral home. I paused to let my words sink in before saying more. I do not know what part of my world your ancestors came from, but I do know where I come from, and I know there are places to make your own. The hardest part will be learning to live among humans in secret. From what I have learned, each race here is dependent on humans to renew their bloodlines, and to do that, they must not know who you truly are. When I have finished school and found a place for everyone wishing to return to live, I will return. We go, responded Shirohei. I wish see human world. I shook my head. I do not know where you would stay. I do not think my mother would allow me to bring home a bunch of strangers to live with us. We go, repeated Shirohei. The other löwenfrau set about packing supplies to carry with them. Shiro suddenly entered the room at that moment carrying a large pack over his shoulder. I am going with you as well. I argued with my gathered companions for hours until I finally gave in. It was finally agreed that the löwenfrau, Fei-shan, Pasha, and Shiro would return with me. We spent the rest of the evening planning what we would do once we arrived. I worked hard to impress on them the need for secrecy, explaining what they should and should not do. It took longer than I thought to explain my world to them and how things worked. Our first plan would be to find my companions a safe place to hide. Our next goal would be to search for them a place to live. I did not think they could just stay out in the woods indefinitely. Once the final details were worked out, I announced the need for sleep. We would leave late in the night in the hope that we would arrive in the human world during the concealment of darkness. The next morning, I stood in the courtyard of my grandmother's estate, trying to focus on an image of where I had first crossed the veil between worlds. I opened my eyes to the sound of thunder overhead. I stood in the middle of a grove of pines where I had once fled from my tormentor. I looked around at my 8 companions. The kitsune were all standing around in their human form, watching their surroundings nervously. Fei-shan retained a surprisingly young appearance given his age. If I had to guess, I would place him in his mid-30s. Shiro, on the other hand, did not look to be much older than me in his human form. The thing that made him stand out was his snow-white hair and gray eyes. Shirohei glanced around casually, unconcerned with her new surroundings. This be human place? Yes, this is part of our forest. Our cities are much bigger and somewhat overcrowded. Worlds smell funny. I had to laugh at Shirohei's statement. To my own sensitive nose, the world did indeed smell funny. I could make out the smell of exhaust, trash, and even the unique smells of territorial markings made by other animals. I made a conscious effort to return to my human form to escape the barrage of foul smells. It was not surprising that the effort to shift was substantially greater here than it was in the other world. The sensations reminded me of my first change. I could feel my bones painfully break and reform. In my human body, I felt as though my skin hung loosely off me. The löwenfrau, following my lead, also began to change shape. Unlike the kitsune, they shifted into the form of their 4-legged counterparts I had seen in zoos as a child. I wondered why they had chosen to revert to a more animal form rather than assume human shape. You will have to keep to the woods, Shirohei. If someone sees you, they will call the police and they will likely kill you. Lions are not exactly native to this area of the world. We spent the night searching for a suitable hiding place for my companions. The best we could find before the sun began to rise was an old, partially collapsed farmhouse. The pasture surrounding it was filled with cattle and horses. The grass outside appeared to be freshly cut, and the rolls of hay scattered about were testimony that the farmer had already harvested the field. Do not kill the cows or horses for food. If the farmer notices any missing, he will start hunting for whatever is taking them. Sherohai sniffed the inside of the house curiously. Once I get home, I will return with a book filled with pictures of animals you can hunt without raising suspicion. I will need a couple of days to settle in before I will be able to return. I left my companions at the abandoned farmhouse and headed for my home. I was distinctly aware of how out of place my handmade clothes were in this world. I would have to go shopping soon to get new clothes for school and for my friends. I felt at my waist for the pouch of gold and silver coins. In my world, gold and silver still had value, but not as much as it held in the other world. I would have to find someone willing to buy the coins so I would have the money to buy suitable garments for the kitsune. I approached my house slowly, aware of how I would look to my mother. I had changed during my time away. For one, I was now taller and slimmer than I had been. I was also aware of the blue tattoos that ran down the entire left side of my body. I had only noticed the extent of the markings that morning before we left. I had dug out my best long-sleeve shirt to cover most of it. I was pretty sure I could hide the ones on my face with makeup. My mom's car was in the driveway, so there was no chance of getting past her without being noticed. I walked up on the porch and opened the door. "Mom?" "Welcome home, honey. How was summer camp?" My mother was thankfully in the kitchen. I took the opportunity to slip up to my room to change and try to cover my blue markings. "It was good. I'm going to put my stuff in my room," I called down the stairs to my mom. I slipped into my room and began rummaging through my closet in search of a new pair of cargo pants and a shirt. I tried to cover the tattoo with makeup without success. My mother was going to flip. I gave up on trying to hide it and headed back down to the kitchen. My mother was fixing lunch. "You hungry? I'm making some sandwiches." I pulled up a stool to the bar. My mother glanced at me, at once noticing the tattoo. "Where did you get the tattoo from?" My mind raced to come up with an answer. "I got it when we went to town. One of the local artists did it for me. I hope you're not mad." My mother set a ham sandwich on the counter for me before going back to making another one for herself. "Is it permanent?" I only nodded, waiting for her to start yelling at me. "I wish you had asked me first, but there's nothing I can do about it now. I hope you thought about the consequences of getting it first. You will have to live with it for the rest of your life." I could not believe I was getting off so easily. I was becoming suspicious there were other reasons for my mother's attitude. "So, what have you been doing while I have been gone?" "Oh, nothing much. Same as always. Started dating again." That was it. I knew there was a reason behind her mellow temperament. "So, what did you do on your birthday?" "Don't change the subject, Mom. Who's this guy you're dating and when do I get to meet him?" I forgot about what I had planned for the day. I wanted to know more about the man my mom had met. Shopping could wait. She blushed in response. "His name is Tim. I met him at work shortly after you left. I think you'll like him." She took a bite of her sandwich, looking at her daughter thoughtfully. "You have lost weight. You must have spent a lot of time playing sports while you were gone." "We did a lot of hiking in the mountains, learning about the countryside. That reminds me, I need to go shopping for some new clothes for school. Is there any way I can get some money, Mom?" She looked thoughtful for a moment before digging a credit card out of her purse. "I thought you might want some money, so I got you a prepaid card and put $300 on it. I figure I would start putting your allowance on the card." I took the card, stunned. This was definitely not the mother I remembered before I left. I did not bother to inquire further, but instead hopped down from the stool and began pulling on my shoes. "Can you drop me off in town, Mom?" Half an hour later, she dropped me off. We did not have a mall, but there were no shortages of stores. Just before I got out, my mom handed me another $50 for a cab home. I quickly pocketed the money and headed down the street with a wave. My first stop was at a thrift store to search for clothes for my friends. 3 hours later and $100 less, I made my way out in search of a coin collector. I inquired at 2 different pawn shops who offered me next to nothing for the coins, claiming they were not real gold. I knew it was a lie, but had respectfully declined the offers. I did finally find a collector who was willing to look up the true value of the coins. I doubted he would find them, so I was shocked to discover they were indeed real. Most of the coins originated from somewhere in Germany. There were others that were from the Zhou Xin dynasty of China. The collector asked where I had gotten them, and I had simply told him they had been passed down by my grandfather. The collector advised me against selling the coins, but admitted he would like to buy at least one of each but could not afford them. I was then directed to contact a museum. With my bags of clothes, I headed out to flag down a cab. I stepped out in front of a house roughly half-mile from where the farmhouse was and set out walking through the field and into the woods out of sight of the road. I came up on who I suspected was Corsa trying to drag a deer back to the house. I could not help but laugh, which received a growl from my companion. The rest of the party was sitting around inside the house looking bored. I was able to come back sooner than I expected, and I brought clothes to help you fit in. I dropped my prize in the middle of the room and began to dig through it. I was pleased to discover I had not been off by much on the sizes. Fei Shan looked up at me doubtfully, but did not argue and went to another room to change. He re-emerged wearing denim jeans and t-shirt with a deadhead skull on the back. The only thing that was out of place on him was his bare feet. I had not thought of shoes since I had not worn any in weeks, and they were not a common item in their world. Pasha was able to help with the footwear problem, as she had brought several pairs with her in anticipation. Pasha changed into her black jeans and shirt. Her boots were laced up and her pants tucked into the tops. I couldn't help but stare at Shiro. The cargo pants and white button-down shirt fit him perfectly. I couldn't resist the urge to admire how well he filled out his shirt with his wide shoulders and deep chest. He reminded me of a guy from an old beach calendar I once had. "I see you like how they fit," he said, a smirk on his face. I turned away in embarrassment as much as to search for Shirohi. The löwenfrau was in the other room, helping the others gut and cut up the deer Corsa had brought back. They had abandoned their lion forms for the humanoid forms I knew best. "I see you've discovered deer. The farmer won't miss them, but be sure you get rid of the insides." Shirohi grinned up at me. "We eat. Human no find." The week passed uneventfully. We spent the afternoons hiking through the mountains in search of a cave or some other place to carve out a more permanent home. I had also sent pictures of the coins to several museums, hoping to hear back from one with an offer to buy the rare artifacts. We found a shallow cave near the base of a mountain near a creek, which excited the löwenfrau. It was only by chance that we had happened across it. We had been combing the parkway in hopes of finding something far enough away from civilization that we would be less likely to be noticed by hunters or farmers. The entrance was barely big enough for anyone to climb through, but it opened into a sizable room once inside. Fei Shan used his power to coax the mouth of the cave open enough for everyone to comfortably enter. The outside was well hidden behind a laurel thicket, so it was unlikely a park ranger would notice it. I vowed to return when I could to help the 3 kitsune expand the dwelling and to shape the stone to make it more suitable for living. Thankfully, there was no need for fire, as they could easily heat the room and cook any game they caught with the use of their gift. I lay in my bed that night, thinking about what we would do. Tomorrow was the first day of school, and I was not looking forward to it.
Thank you for joining us for another edition of A Kitsune's Tale. We hope you will return for more.